They called it trepanation, a word that echoes like a whisper through the dusty scrolls of forgotten medicine. Word that means to bore into the skull. Not metaphorically, literally. It was not science, not yet. It was desperation wrapped in ritual, a sacred dance between pain and hope. The man at the center of it, Cassian of Hegra, was no healer, though history dared to call him one. His name is buried in no textbook, sung in no lecture hall. A man wrapped in wolf furs and arrogance, Luno ruled the temple infirmary with whispers and secrets. He took Cassian under his wing not out of kindness, but curiosity. "You want to cut where the gods live?" he asked, grinning as he handed him a bone saw. "Let's see how loud they scream." But in the shadowy chambers beneath the temple of Iran, he carved open the heads of the sick, and sometimes they woke up smiling. He didn't resist. Cassian shaved the scalp, felt the ridges of the skull like a sculptor, and began to drill with a hand-cranked bit made for shaping ivory. One woman walked into the desert, barefoot and naked, whispering that the stars were in her bones. Another man bit off his own tongue and fed it to a dog. The temple priests grew silent. And somewhere, deep inside Cassian, Lisa's voice echoed louder. He began to see her in the faces of patients, in the curls of bone dust, in the twitching eyes beneath his scalpel. She was calling him towards something, a final incision, a last patient. Cassian wrote everything down. He called it the dialogue of the hollow skull. He believed the pain was a spirit that could be released, but he also began to suspect that some skulls were meant to stay closed. The man didn't scream until the third turn, but when the pressure released with a sudden wet crack, his eyes rolled back. The afflicted, the mad, the cursed, they all arrived with pounding temples and hollow eyes. Whispering of demons in their heads, Cassian met them with calm hands and colder eyes. He marked their skulls with soot and lines. Each cut, a silent prayer. Each hole, a doorway. And through those doorways, something began to whisper back, and then settled. The fever broke. He lived, even smiled. Other times, they didn't wake up at all. Cassian wasn't born cruel. In fact, some claimed he was born under a blood eclipse, a mark of burdened genius. His mother bled for 2 days after his birth, and the midwife died the next morning. She was 12 when the sickness began, pounding in her head, like hooves in her skull, each morning brighter than the last. Cassian watched as their mother pressed herbs against her temples. He only opened her skull beneath torchlight, searching for the pain. He never found it, but he found purpose. His priests sang incantations and burned bitter oils. But the gods didn't answer. Only the screams did. One night, when the stars were low and the air tasted like copper, Lysa clawed at her head until her nails split. She whispered, "Cut it out, please. Cut it out." Cassian stood beside her with a blade in hand and didn't move. A bad omen, whispered the villagers. But his father, a silent stonecutter, simply stared at the child's large, unblinking eyes and said, "He sees too much. They weren't wrong." Cassian could see patterns in the decay of fruit, symmetry in the madness of the wind, and later, pulsing rhythms in the veins of the dying. By 12, he'd already assisted in a dozen amputations, his hands steadier than the priest's. But it was his sister Lysa who would haunt him. She died 2 days later. They buried her in silence, but Cassian dug her up 3 nights after. He didn't cry. It was the priest surgeon Luno who first noticed his obsession. The first patient was a herder, delirious from sunstroke and fever. Cassian thought it was a miracle. Luno called it luck. Word spread like mold in damp cloth. Pilgrims came not for prayers, but for knives, because not all patients healed. Some woke with laughter too loud, others with silence too deep. Still, he drilled. He drilled through prophecy, through protest, through sleepless nights and failing candles. Luno began to fear him, and Cassian was ready. There was a man brought to Cassian's table whose name had been forgotten. They called him the Coppermouth, for every word he spoke echoed like metal on stone, sharp, erratic, painful. He came in chains, dragged by 3 temple guards, eyes wild and bloodshot from sleepless months. They said he hadn't stopped speaking in 72 days, that even in sleep his tongue moved like it was possessed. His wife had died birthing their 3rd child, and that night the whispering began. He claimed to hear gods in the walls, numbers in his skin, voices beneath his teeth. Cassian listened. The others wanted to throw him into the sandpits, to let the desert silence his madness. But Cassian said no. He believed the man's suffering was not madness. It was a rupture. A fissure between the world of thought and the cage of bone. Cassian knew how to open cages. He bound the copper mouth to the marble slab. Candles lined the walls, flickering shadows that danced like ghosts. Cassian prepared his instruments with the precision of ritual. The man was wide awake. He would remain that way. Cassian believed pain was the bridge between the illness and the cure. The drill sank through the forehead just above the brow line. The man screamed, but not in pain. In relief, his limbs tensed, then softened, like ropes cut loose. The moment the bit pierced into the upper skull plate, he fell silent, eyes fluttering, chest heaving. When the fragment was removed, the air in the room changed. Denser, tighter, the guards crossed themselves. The copper mouth smiled, and then he whispered something that Cassian would never forget. "I see your sister. She's behind you." Cassian froze. It was impossible. No one knew. No one could have known. He leaned closer. "What did you say?" But the man was already convulsing, blood streaming from his nose and ears. Moments later, he was gone. But his face, still smiling. That night, Cassian didn't sleep, didn't even close his eyes. He stared at his notes until the ink blurred. Is it coincidence? Delusion? Or had the drill touched something deeper? Some part of the mind where memory and spirit blurred? The coppermouth had seen Lysa, or at least something wearing her voice. In the days that followed, the temple grew quieter around Cassian, not out of reverence, out of fear. Rumors whispered through the stone corridors that he could hear the dead, that his patients were speaking in tongues unknown, that sometimes the holes in their skulls bled long after death. But the sick kept coming. One patient, a girl, no older than Lysa, came in with a pounding so severe she'd be bitten through a wooden block. Her mother begged Cassian not to hurt her. She even offered her own head instead. Cassian refused. The girl was already lost inside herself. He saw it in her eyes, half beyond. He shaved her scalp with trembling hands. His fingers brushed her temple, and for a moment he saw Lysa again as glassy, mouth half open, begging him to do what he couldn't do before. The drill went in, but this time nothing happened. The pressure released. The bone lifted clean. But the girl never blinked. Her breathing slowed, then stopped. Her mother screamed, clawing at Cassian's chest, but he didn't fight back. He stood there, numb, the drill still in his hand, her blood on his robe. For the first time, he didn't take notes. He just sat by her side until her body cooled. That night, he buried her with his own hands. No priest, no chance. Just him and the soil. He placed her body beside a stone carving of Lysa's name. The moon watched silently. The next day, Cassian locked the infirmary doors. He sealed the surgical room with wax and ash. He sat alone in the archives and read the old scrolls, the ones Luno kept hidden. Forbidden rituals. Bone charts not sanctioned by the temple. Theories written in madness. One scroll spoke of the third path, a canal between the crown and the soul. It claimed that opening this path would not only relieve pain, but release memory, even spirit. Cassian became convinced that he had only scratched the surface. He hadn't gone deep enough. He hadn't listened properly. But Luno intervened. He confronted Cassian before the full temple council, called him reckless, dangerous, claimed that Cassian had become obsessed with death, not healing. Cassian didn't argue. He only said this: pain is a door. You're too afraid to open it. The council gave him a choice: cease all procedures, surrender his tools, and take the oath of silence, or leave the temple. Cassian left. He walked into the desert with a single bag, a wrapped scalpel, and the fragment of bone from the copper-mouthed skull. He didn't know where he was going, only that the voice of Lysa was louder than ever. She was waiting. The desert does not speak, it waits. And Cassian, with his tools wrapped in linen and a bone fragment tucked beside his heart, walked deeper into its silence than any man of the temple had dared. Days passed. Nights collapsed into starlight and fever dreams. He whispered Lysa's name with every step, as if the wind would carry it backward through time. He wasn't seeking a cure anymore. He was seeking her. Or perhaps the echo of her. The part of her that still bled through fractured minds and hollow skulls. On the 12th night, he stumbled upon a fire in the Dunzan oasis of flame surrounded by outcasts. They called themselves the Hallowed, old soldiers with eyes like rust, midwives who had lost too many children. Men who claimed to have died and come back wrong. These were not madmen, but men who had stared too long into grief, into God, and found no answer. When Cassian told them what he had done, what he had opened, they didn't recoil. They leaned closer. I asked if it worked. He didn't answer. Instead, he showed them the bone fragment, the spiral channel he had carved, the smoothness of the canal. He spoke of pressure, of release, of the strange visions patients uttered before death. One man, a former priest with half his jaw, gonifered Cassian, his own skull. "Want to see what's left of me?" he rasped. Cassian refused, at first. But over the weeks, as he lived among them, his resolve withered. The Hallowed became his disciples. They spoke of dreams stitched together from broken memories. They claimed their pain had meaning, that perhaps Cassian's blade could draw it out and name it. And so he returned to his tools. There was no marble slab here, no clean linen or temple incense, just sand, blood, and bone. Cassian operated beneath the stars, carving into the heads of men who had nothing left to lose. Some of them awoke changed, eyes clearer, voices steadier. One woman, mute for 7 years, began to sing in her sleep. But others. One man began weeping the moment Cassian breached the skull. Not in pain, but in grief so deep it shook the dunes. He died whispering the name of a son no one knew he had. Another sat bolt upright after surgery and began speaking in a language no one understood until his throat tore open from screaming. Cassian wrote none of it down. He no longer trusted the page, trusted only the pulse beneath the bone, the tremor in his fingers before incision. Always before each procedure, he asked the same question. "Do you want to remember? That was the gift now? Not healing, not silence, but memory, buried pain, forgotten names." The Hallowed believed they were offering their skulls as vessels to speak with the dead, to glimpse something beyond the veil of thought. Cassian no longer argued. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps the soul really was trapped behind bone. But something darker began to stir. Cassian awoke one night to find his hands covered in blood. Not dried, not crusted fresh. But no one in the camp was injured. His tools were untouched. And yet there it was, red beneath his nails, the smell thick and metallic. He scrubbed until his skin cracked. That night, he heard Lysa again. Closer this time, she didn't sound like a child anymore. Another night, he found the coppermouth's fragment cracked in two. Split down the center like it had been crushed underfoot. No one admitted to touching it. One of the Hallowed suggested it had split from too many echoes. Cassian said nothing. But deep in his marrow he felt it, the pressure building again. One final patient arrived, a stranger. No name, no voice. Just a withered man with one eye, who carried a scroll sealed in black wax. Inside was a map. Not of lands, but of a skull. It was drawn in red ink, with annotations that mirrored Cassian's own theories, only more precise, more prophetic. At the center of the map, marked with a symbol Cassian had seen only in dreams, were 3 words. The path opens. The stranger offered no explanation, only pointed to his head. And Cassian, against every instinct, agreed. The Hallowed gathered in silence. Cassian shaved the skull, marked the incision in soot, and placed his trembling hands on the stranger's temples. But as he began to drill, he felt something resisting the bone, but the air itself, like the world was holding its breath. The bit bit through, slow and heavy, and the moment the skull cracked, the sky shifted. The stars realigned, the wind ceased. And from the stranger's lips came not a scream, not a whisper, but a single word. Lysa. Cassian dropped the drill. The stranger's body slumped forward, lifeless, but his eye remained open-focused, unblinking. And in it, Cassian saw not a reflection, but a memory. His sister, pale and smiling, reaching toward him, her mouth moving, though no sound came. He fell to his knees, hands shaking, eyes wide. He had found the door. Cassian did not sleep after the stranger's death. He sat beside the corpse until the sand turned cold and the wind returned. The hollow dared not speak to him. Some thought he had seen God. Others thought he had seen something worse. The eye of the stranger, still open, still staring, seemed to rot slower than the rest of the body, as if whatever had looked out from within was not yet finished with him. Cassian wrapped the skull in linen and carried it with him like an icon. But something had changed. The whispering no longer came from outside. It came from within. Lisa's voice curled behind his thoughts, murmuring things he had forgotten, the sound of her laughter on rainy days, the feverish panic in her voice when the pain came, and the quiet shame he carried when he stood over her bed with a knife and did nothing. He began to see faces in the dunes. Faces of patients long dead, smiling with open skulls, their minds hollowed and echoing. He heard footsteps behind him when he walked alone, though none followed. He caught glimpses of his own reflection, blinking at the wrong time. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with hunger. The hunger to know more, to go deeper, to peel back the last veil. He no longer operated on others. He began designing a mirror. Not a glass one, but a mirror of flesh and thought. His own skull laid bare, turned inward, to see what no man had ever seen. He recorded nothing. He spoke to no one. He carved a sanctum beneath the sand, a chamber lit with phosphor flame. Walls etched with diagrams and fragments from the black scroll. In the center, a slab, a mirror, a blade, and one final note etched in blood. She is waiting. No one knows how long it took, whether he sedated himself or remained awake through the whole ordeal, whether he succeeded or failed, whether what followed was truth or myth. But what is known, what every member of the Hallowed swore by the edge of their dreams, was that, on the final night, the wind carried a sound unlike any heard before or since, a scream that folded in on itself, like bones snapping inward. When the Hallowed found the chamber, Cassian was gone. Only the slab remained, stained, empty, and beside it, a mirror fogged from within, though no breath touched it. Some claimed to see a face behind the glass, a young girl smiling with blood in her eyes. Others said the room was utterly still, and yet when they left, each carried a headache that pulsed for days. A pressure, a whisper, a memory that wasn't theirs. The temple denied all of it. They struck Cassian's name from their records, burned his notes, called him mad, claimed his surgeries were fraud, his patients deluded, his hands the tools of blasphemy. But they never found his body, and they never dared enter the desert again. Centuries passed, but the legend of the hollow surgeon lived on. In some villages they say if your migraine lasts more than 7 days, you should not see a physician. You should walk into the dunes and listen. And if you hear drilling in the wind stop, drop to your knees. And do not answer, no matter what voice calls your name, because it may not be your name they're calling. It may be hers. And it may already be too late.